I got a good chuckle. Some people were freaking out when I said this series is going to end out 2025. That's right, it'll take a while to accomplish the documentation of the Limited Colors series, but this one is the August release back in 1990. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. This one is known as Transparent Amber, and when I bought the complete set of this series, this is the one I liked the best because look at this. We've got a little bit of flame figuring within here. We've got a stellar plain top with a bunch of wood grain. This is a prime example of a Limited Colors series standard, which is also why I was the most upset when it got damaged. This is why you remove the bottom strap button when shipping guitars. I know it might seem silly, but occasionally they can sink inside the guitar, and very rarely they can act as a chisel and completely crack it up the center. So we'll get this one all cleaned up today and learn all about it. The Limited Colors series was birthed in 1990. Starting through July and running through December, the colors were a transparent red Les Paul Custom, followed up by 4 standards in transparent amber, transparent blue, transparent mocha, and finally transparent fuchsia, before they round out the series in December with a transparent white custom again. They produced 200 of each color, so that makes a total of 1,200 guitars and 200 sets. 150 sets of which were intended for the USA market and 50 for the international. And these things were a breath of fresh air, because you gotta remember, this is 1990. It's basically when Gibson figured out what people wanted again. Les Pauls were becoming popular, and they started to produce so many cool colors. So even though we're kind of spoiled today with the 50s and 60s standards coming in pretty much any color you could ever want, this was fresh and new. I mean, not only do we have this trans amber top, which you might think about Slash for on this, but this is legitimately an orange back. Like, you can see that very apparent here on the neck. It reminds me a lot of a Chet Atkins model that we had at one point in time. So if you were thinking that these trans ambers were just trans amber on the front only and regular mahogany on the back, no, that's not the case. The case is pink, and it's that brown exterior version. How could you confuse the two? Not just kidding. But I suppose while we're over here, you gotta remember, this is the very early version of the Gibson USA case. This came out in the late 80s, but the very early ones do not have the headstock wedge, which I think is a headstock breaker more than a saver. So I like these personally, but they were made in Canada. But as far as case candy on this one, we've got the original Gibson USA owner's manual, just like that last one. Our truss rod tool, as well as the original price placard, not filled out. The combo lock pamphlet, and our warranty page, also not filled out, because if you remember correctly, my collection that I bought new old stock from an old shop owner was never sold, although sadly they were displayed, and let's just say this needs a lot of help. It's gonna need a truss rod adjustment. It's got hanger rash, although not as bad as some of the other ones. So maybe you can make the argument for new old stock, but definitely not mint condition. But anyways, back to the whole standard story. Standards were starting to change at this point. You had things like the Les Paul Classic coming out in late 1989. You had the prehistoric reissues, and then 1993 brings out the formal custom shop. A 1990 standard is actually still going to look very 80s-like, because look, our logo is still that kind of blocky looking one. They have not yet adopted the modern Gibson logo, so that gives them a unique appearance. We're slowly transitioning back to 2-piece tops. Now, you can still find some 3-piece in the 90s, but generally speaking, this is when that transition starts to occur. Top carve is something they just slowly get better and better at. I would say this one is actually fairly carved for a Gibson USA product. What I'm trying to say is 90s ones, they're good. They're well respected. However, personally, I prefer the early 2000s or one of the brand new ones. But if you're looking for a little bit more vintage flair, that's when you consider a late 80s, early 90s. A famous user of one of these is Slash. His Jessica Les Paul is a refinished factory second late 80s Les Paul standard that still has the 3-piece top. You can check out a review of the Gibson USA version of that guitar here. But to learn more about this one, let's go ahead and get it on over to the Workbench, clean it up, then do a nice basic tone demo. All right, here were the frets before. Very corroded, not looking that good. And after a 3.5-hour live stream, we've got those things looking great now. And we also polished up the rest of the guitar while we're at it. So now this is starting to look like how it was advertised first time to me. However, I actually discovered something new. This has always been called trans amber online for as long as I can remember. But according to this, it's trans yellow, even though it looks very orange over the mahogany. But I suppose I can kinda see it here. Now you gotta remember, some of this has aged over time, so maybe the binding wasn't always exactly this color. Although a great judge of initial binding color is the top side of the fretboard binding because that does not have any finish on it. So you can see it is slightly more yellowed than that. But that is a very important discovery here. Unfortunately, nobody was able to find anything about this series. In my first episode, I said if anybody has official marketing for this, and we can get the true colors, that'd be great. Otherwise, we'll just have to go by what we find in the cavities. So this one is officially trans yellow. Otherwise, it just says Gab in the neck pickup cavity. And then we have a date of production down here. Despite being the August guitar, it looks like it might say September 6th or 16th of 1990. Very cool. I wish Gibson would still do markings like that in their guitars. I know their serial numbers are easy to read, but that's just the neck stamping day, not necessarily body production or anything like that. But what I'm showing you here is our two-piece maple top joining on to our mahogany body. Weight relief started in 1983. I would imagine this has the 9-hole weight relief style. Now let's learn about our pickups. For 1990, this is what you should have. It might still look like the Tim Shaw base plate, it's just the patent number. These are not Tim Shaw's. They should be 490R, 498T. This is just a very early version of them. If I remember correctly, it's like 1992, 93 when they switch over into the Gibson USA base plates. But our readings within the circuit is 13.5 K ohms in the bridge, 723 in the neck, and the middle just for fun, 471. Now something to keep in mind, occasionally they'll mess up and you'll get two 490Rs or two 498Ts. So taking the reading like that really is the best way because the 498T should be almost twice as hot like we just saw. Here's how those pickup covers turned out. They had some corrosion or something going on. I wasn't able to clean all the pitting off, but they certainly look a lot nicer now. It's not overly apparent until you really get up in their face. However, when taking this apart, I noticed, our bridge pickup ring is a significantly different color than our neck. Has it been replaced? Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is yes. In this case, I do believe that has been swapped, as we have the correct MR492 marking up here, whereas this one has copyright FGR. And I don't believe I've ever seen that on a Gibson before, but sometimes the plastics do age slightly differently. But here's something to know about late 80s, early 90s. Their pickup rings, whatever they were making them out of, they don't always stand the test of time. They can start to bow outward or upward, and then they'll crack, and then obviously you have to replace that to look right. This one, you can see it's physically bending up, so eventually that's going to break too. I'm just gonna leave it as is for now. Oddly though, it's the replaced pickup ring that matches our pick guard better, but we've got some similar pitting over there, but here's what it looks like. Cleaned up to the best of my abilities anyway. And now we can move on to our bridge and tailpiece. It's just a regular Nashville style one, so you've got your posts within the body. And this is the version still made by Schaller. It reads made in Germany. Not too long after that, it'll eventually say made in and then Germany down here. It's slightly collapsed, but not too bad. I think it'll work fine. And as far as our tailpiece, some mild pitting. That appears to be the original one. And most importantly, it's full weight. Now something important to note is I did find a small gouge in the top. It looks like somebody had a setup tool or maybe their screwdriver slipped when installing the new pickup ring, but there's certainly a little something right there in the clear coat that is technically visible if you know to look for it. But once you have the strings on, it'll hide it even more. I had some people commenting on the live stream about the speed knobs. Yep, that is stock on this particular model. You don't find it on too many standards outside of that, but that's just something to know. And it's just your regular double tone, double volume setup. One set for the neck, one set for the bridge. But let's just take a second to really appreciate this top. It's got some very unique wood grain, but then as an added bonus, it's got a whole bunch of flame going on too. Well, maybe whole bunch isn't the right term there, but there's enough for you to be a little bit excited about it as you go, because it plays peekaboo on you. The perfect plane top, in my opinion. I also really like this because it reminds me of one of the lava bubbles from Super Mario, so I think for that reason, this is an extra keeper for my collection. And I kind of like this weird splotch in the wood right there, but here's what it looks like with our poker chip removed. And now back on. The reason I take that off is you'd be surprised what can get stuck under there when you're cleaning it. Now we can move on from our body to our mahogany neck and rosewood fretboard. Just your regular 22 frets. You've got those characteristic late 80s, early 90s style inlays. And for the most part, I didn't see tons and tons of tooling marks. Nor do I see lots of evidence of this ever having extensive playtime. It conditioned up beautifully. It just needed a little bit of TLC. But I measure a 24 3/4 inch scale. But that's interesting. This is actually closest to a 10-inch fretboard radius. Because you can see the board is just a little bit more round than 12. So that's a little different. We'll have to check the other standards and customs to see if they're different. Because I'm certain this guitar has not been refretted. 1.69 inch nut width, following 2.06 at the 12th. Pretty skinny, 0.82 first fret neck depth, but 0.97 at the 12th. Personally, I classify these more as a 60 slim taper. Do they chunk up a bit here? Yeah, but it's more so the neck shape that changes rather than it getting huge. Here's a look at that neck profile at the first fret and the 12th fret. Just nice and rounded, like I was saying. Almost a soft V nearly at the 12th. You get a bit of a hump to the back of the neck. We can see some mild humidity fret sprout cracks on our binding, but overall, nothing too crazy to worry about. And I suppose while I have it up, you can see some of our stand rash situation over here. It looks like it's slightly dinged the top, so you can see that when you're just looking up here. And the blacklight will help us a little bit, but you can also see some more stand rash down here. They just had all kinds of stands going on. And you've got some more of that on this side as well. As far as the rest of the headstock, not too bad. You have a slightly ambered over Gibson logo with your Les Paul metal silkscreen. And thankfully, no 90s era lacquer delamination up here. So we can call that a win. But our truss rod is functioning just fine. I actually had to adjust it a bit. You can see the bare mahogany there. And then check this out. You see this sometimes. Nice standard truss rod cover, right? They actually had to shave it just a little bit right there to make it fit. But now moving on to our translucent yellow back. I did find some mild scuffs in this area. They're not too deep. There's also a few light dings back here, but no buckle gouging or anything. Honestly, I'm really not worked up about that because there's other things like the stand rash that make this not perfect already. So a few small dings aren't a big deal. But we'll start in with our electronics. We've got our stock large disc capacitors in both locations. And then we have the 35th week of 1990 dated pots all around the board. I would say this one looks perfectly fine. Now the bridge pickup, I could honestly go either way. I believe it to be stock solder work though. But could it be that the reason why this one has a replaced pickup ring is they tried a different pickup in it at one point in time? I mean, if we can believe the shop story, it seems unlikely, but they had to have at least replaced the ring. Unless there's something else I don't know, like they changed pickup ring manufacturers halfway through. Again, we're going to document the whole series. Maybe we'll find something else. The back plates for this model are correct at brown. But while I was in here, I went ahead and cleaned out all the electronics. But here's what our toggle switch cavity is looking like. And this model utilizes thick binding in the cutaway. That's mainly the name of the game in the 90s. And what's kind of interesting is we've got that dark yellow grain fill on top of our trans yellow finish. But now let's talk about the strap button situation. This was hard to excavate, but that's the damage we're looking at here. That just sank straight through into the guitar quite deeply, just a little bit more than a 1/4 inch into the body, because that area is supposed to be flush. And the reason for that, because in transit, if it gets dropped directly on the strap pin, you basically just sink it up into the guitar. This is acting like a chisel, and it's not nice and pointed. It's super round at the base. So it just kind of forces it into the wood like you're nailing something to it. So you can fill and re-drill. You can do the toothpick method. You could ream it out, put a new piece of wood in that's like decorative, and then do it, and then you would never know. I don't have those skills. I usually just stuff them full of paper towel, and if you get enough in there, it works, and then maybe one other day I'll get it fixed more professionally. But moving on from our body, here's our neck. You can see maybe some mild impressions here or there, but nothing crazy. I mean, this right here is what I'm talking about. Just hardly even noticeable unless you're really going for it. Another area is right here in the typical headstock crack place. We've got some scratches. Now I know, it might look sinister. It's not. It's likely related to the stand and how it hugged up against it. But this is quite interesting. The limited colors decal back here is really yellow, and I think that's due to the translucent yellow finish as well as the ambering of the clear coat. But I thought that was fun to see. Here's our Gibson Deluxe tuners with our serial number, dating this one to the 249th day of 1990, production number 355. Well, there we go, all put back together. I thought of another argument as to why the bridge pickup ring is replaced. If you feel them, they make different sounds. Here's the neck. It's nice and smooth, whereas the bridge, it's all scratchy and feels not as high quality. I also forgot to point this out earlier. There is a black splotch of paint. There were a few of those that I was able to clean off, but that one appears to be underneath the clear coat, or it's just a bit more stuck. But here's how the stuffing job went. You can hardly even tell it's there. It worked out pretty good. Now I know what you're thinking. How common is that in transit? I've only ever had it happen twice. It was on a Les Paul Artisan and this one. So is it mandatory to remove every single bottom strap button when you ship a guitar? Not necessarily. Usually I just do it on the very hard or impossible to replace guitars. It's a mild inconvenience, but saves you a lot of trouble should things go wrong. Because there's buyers out there like me where that's a non-negotiable. I might return a guitar due to that. Whereas other people, they don't care. They'll fill and re-drill. It really just depends on what guitar are you talking about here. But oh boy, if you didn't notice the bridge pickup ring was replaced before this point, the Blacklight test clearly shows it's made out of a different material. But again, sometimes there are differences in the glowing of even the stock ones, but that one, no. But I don't see any finished touch-up over here. Our headstock is nice and evenly glowing as well. The back is also looking not too shabby. Now, surprisingly, there actually appears to be a little bit of clear coat wear right there. Not sure what that's about. Sometimes it can just be buffed from the factory, like they buffed it down a bit too much. But it looks like we're free from any major funny business here. But you can see those stand rash marks a little bit more clearly there. And here's those other black marks from a stand I was talking about earlier. Although they're primarily only visible on the treble side. And now that I don't have my bright lights on, I forgot to mention, after polishing the back, the chatoyant movement to the wood grain is really quite nice. We've got a little bit of a bird's eye pattern going on here. There's even just a little bit of like flame figuring or something within our neck. You can see it dance around. That's what people are talking about when they're talking about the good wood era. They really did start to use slightly nicer quality mahogany and rosewoods. And that's not saying 70s and 80s is bad. It's just different. They have a very distinct look to them. And now that I see it in this lighting, that's a mineral streak line. That's not a crack or anything, just in case you were wondering. All said and done though, this one is 9 pounds, 12.7 ounces. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how it sounds. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what this sounds like clean. I would say it's a very open and airy sounding guitar. Especially that middle position. Love how chimey that is. But that neck pickup adds just a little bit of that raunchiness to it. bridge is a fire breather. So there we go. I'm glad I was finally able to do the full review and documentation of this because we need to rewrite the history books according to what we found on the inside of this guitar. This is the Trans Yellow, not Trans Amber, Limited Colors Series Edition. And once I associated yellow, it's like, yeah, Yellow Ledbetter, that's a good song. Yellow Submarine's another one you could potentially play on this. You don't find many dedicated yellow guitars. And that's what's cool about some of these Limited Colors Series editions is they haven't seen widespread reissuing necessarily. And it's just the beginning of Gibson doing these cool limited editions. Now, ultimately, for whatever reason you get your hands on this guitar in the future, there's a few playability issues I noticed. Stock from the factory, the nut is just cut too high. That's what was making me think that the neck was out of whack when I first got this thing. But no, it's just, it needs filed down a bit. It makes the action feel much higher than it actually is. And since this hasn't been played a lot, the binding's edge is very fresh. I'm not going to say sharp, but you feel the point of it. It hasn't been worn down by somebody's hand rubbing against it. But to say this is a stiff feeling guitar, I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I think if you file that nut down, the playability would increase, and then you'll just naturally wear down that edge. But this thing is very fresh, even though it is turning 35 years old. But all right, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed our August edition of our series of documenting all the Limited Colors Series guitars. I hope you enjoyed, and if not, hey, we'll catch you tomorrow on a new one. Take care.